Thank you for all the audience. It's been a long day, and thank you for being here. I hope it'll be a very interesting session. We have a very, very diverse members of the panel, and you'll get a very good view on the varied, different aspects of edtech and education in general. So what the format will follow is, we'll have all the panelists open, few opening remarks, about 4 to 5 minutes each. Then, as a moderator, I'll just initiate some discussions, ask a few questions of the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So we have 40 minutes. So I think I'll just request the panelists to stay within about 3 minutes each, so that we get more time with the audience later. So we'll start with Neerav and come down all the way this way.
Thank you, Vivek, and hello everybody. My name is Neerav Kambati. I work with Tata ClassEdge. At Tata ClassEdge, we started with introduction of a digital instructional solution to be used by teachers in the classroom. As was said earlier, I think it would be a pipe dream to think that teachers would ever be replaced with technology. Today, that solution is in use in about 15,000 classrooms across India, and we take a lot of pride in the fact that about 2 million children are benefited by studying the Tata ClassEdge way. There have been some fairly significant learnings along the way. We realized that education is a word that encompasses lots of segments and sub-segments within that, and there is certainly no silver bullet. When you start segmenting the number of schools, 1.6 million as was said earlier, into the kind of solution offerings that you have, you perhaps are left with barely a few thousand, or at best tens of thousands. In our case, when we started working, we realized that in the very first few years, in the first 3 years of our operation, of all the schools that we acquired, 50% of them, half of them, we had to discontinue working before the end of contract, either due to reasons of the school or due to our own reasons, but it didn't just work out. And therefore, post that, we've been extremely selective about the kind of schools that we work with. Of all the schools that we've acquired in the last 2 years, only 7% have discontinued working with us. So that was one key learning. The other key learning, of course, was the fact that we need to be an education company before we become a technology company. And an example of that is when we first introduced our product, the interface looked like a very computer interface. And we realized the tough way that most of the teachers at schools in India have never used a computer before. So the next product that we came out with had a very smartphone interface, because all the teachers may not have used a computer, all of them are very familiar and comfortable with use of a smartphone. So that's it.
Hi, I'm Deepak Natraj, Managing Director of RN Capital. I have proprietary capital of Mohandas Pai and Ranjan Pai. Mohandas Pai, most of you have heard of. He's the ex-Infosys person who's probably one of the most prolific angel investors these days. And of course, Ranjan Pai belongs to the Manipal family. So the university has about 20,000 students from 50-odd countries, primarily in professional education, architecture, engineering, med school. They also have Mage. Gopal was here earlier. That's a business that Ranjan owns, and that reaches out about 250,000 learners a year. RN, of course, is only a VC fund. It does not own any of these businesses. It deploys capital in education and medtech companies and a few assorted India opportunities. So right now, as all funds are judged, we are riding a high because we just largely exited Byju's Think and Learn. We made a lot of money on it. It was a fascinating journey. Our pride comes that, money comes as the consequence of some of your decisions. But what our greatest happiness, pride, and joy is that we are the first investors in Byju, and that we found the opportunity early. We worked with the founder, who's a very dynamic, very, very smart person, very passionate, and we worked with him through a pivot from what he was using technology. We'll talk about that probably a little later. But that was one of our great successes. We have a few others which are in various parts of the education thing. education ecosystem. But there is, before I finish, I'd just like to finish with, one fundamental theme that's driving our thinking in terms of investing in edtech ideas now. We believe that pretty much hitherto, most people built their learning for earning as architects. Now we are entering the era of everybody learning to learn, learning to earn as gardeners. The fundamental difference being an architect finishes a building. A gardener never finishes tending, mending the garden. So we are moving, there's a paradigm shift, both in terms of what the outcomes you expect after learning and the way people are learning and how we're going forward.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arpit Barjatia. I'm the CEO and founder of Cerosoft Solutions. We are a company which is focused on the education ERP space, working primarily with higher education and also school segment. In the last 8 years of our journey, there's quite a few lessons that we have learned. We have gone through a couple of cycles of our product delivery, tried to contextualize it even better. We worked with academicians and gotten some real feedback in order for it to be incorporated into products. So that has been one learning. We've also understood that riding the wave is important. Getting there too early or too late obviously is not going to work wonders for you. And we have gone from a time when 4 or 5 years ago, when I went to a education owner and said, so it's in Hindi ki sir, main aapka cloud pe server host karenge. So that was an elderly gentleman. He said, cloud pe server rakhoge to geela to nahi ho jayega. So from those days till today, we've seen a massive transition in the Indian, and I'm talking from an Indian B2B perspective more so, of adopting new technologies, paradigms, as Neerav said, moving towards mobile, cloud, and all of the other stuff that this panel will discuss as we go ahead. So, over to you.
Hi, my name is Shubroto Das. I work for SAP, Public Services, Internet of Things, Higher Education Research, Healthcare. These are my domains. And higher education and research per se is one of the 26 industry verticals that SAP as an organization focuses on. And we've been helping these entities run better, run live, and run simple for almost close to 2 decades now in India. This being our 20th year of operations in this country. Personally, this is my 25th year in the industry. I started off with the, opening up of the information technology industry per se. I like to evangelize on the new technology disruptions, and I think as an industry, we are at a Gutenberg part 2 kind of a moment. I'm sure everybody is familiar with Gutenberg because he's the one who actually invented the printing press. So that kind of revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge all across the world. And I think with the disruptions that are happening in the technology world with social, mobile, analytics, cloud, additive printing, artificial intelligence, we are at the center of a perfect storm which is transforming this sector. And at SAP, as advisors to critical IT interventions for higher education research organizations, it's our responsibility to show the roadmap and become a trusted advisor to entrepreneurs and educational sector decision makers. So that's what we do for a living. Personally, I think what I'm going to discuss today is about how these technologies are shaping the way business to business is typically happening in this sector. And as it comes, we'll take it. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Srini Raghavan. I'm CEO of Educational Initiatives. Been a really awesome day today to be part of this session, and thank you for all of you who are staying back late afternoon for our panel. Educational Initiatives has been around for a long time. We started in 2001 as a bootstrap company focused on K-12 education. Initially started with assessments and then moved on to adaptive learning. When we had a humongous amount of data on assessments and we looked at that data and we said, what do we do with this? Because this is like a treasure chest. And then we said we need to help children learn and use this data productively to help children learn. And then we had our other next product, which was MindSpark, which is an adaptive learning solution. And then we further looked at, assessment and said, if we can do conceptualized assessment or concept-based assessment for children as they learn, as they make progress, that will give us even more rich data. And we have another solution called detailed assessment, which is, almost like a doctor ordering additional medical tests when you go to him. So more focused, more in-depth, more targeted, detailed testing or assessing of students. So this is how we started and gone through the journey. Our focus for the future is to look at technology, look at how we can utilize the emerging trends, how we can do that to help the students learn better rather than being lectured at, how we can help teachers and teacher augmentation solutions which help them build, use their time productively in class, whereas, you don't have too many teachers and some of the teachers that are there are not very good. So how can technology do some of the work for them and help them do their job better? And also looking at futuristic tools which will help us, overall address the solution of K-12 education primarily. Thank you.
Thanks. We are a good panel. We are well within our time. So I'll just start with maybe Neerav. Neerav, if you look at e-learning or edtech, there are broadly three components. There's content, there's technology, and there's services, right? Vineet mentioned that content is the most important. I know I was talking to Prachi here from MSDF. She said, we're looking at people who, not content, but technology. Right? So there are different views. In your experience, where is the biggest gap and what should entrepreneurs do? Which of these three is a bigger gap and where the opportunities are?
So, before answering that, I'm going to ask a question and maybe throw it open to the audience as a quiz. So there was this gentleman, a very bright gentleman, who said that textbooks will be obsolete from the schools in the next 10 years. Any guesses who said this and when? So I'm going to drop a hint. If I give you the answer, it will light a bulb in your head. So this was said by somebody as bright as Thomas Edison in 1913. Right? So the first thing I think the entrepreneurs need to realize is that education changes very, very slowly. It's perhaps one of the slowest adopters of technology. So, everything else that can be digitized, movies, music, games, they're moving at a much faster rate. The other thing that the entrepreneurs need to realize is that every time there is a significant disruption in education, it is always rejected. There have been 4 most significant disruptions in education so far. Introduction of writing in 3200 BC. Actually, introduction of the movable type, not by Gutenberg, sir, as you mentioned, but by the Chinese in the year 1040, because the first movable types were of porcelain. Introduction of mass printing in the 19th century, and finally internet. And all of them have been rejected. So the Socrates was dead against writing because he thought that it hurt the dialogic process. The Gutenberg Bibles were rejected by the church because that made something as precious as the Bible accessible to the common man. Due to proliferation of printing press, there were lots of novels that came out. And the public perception at that point in time was novels disrupt your memory and make you susceptible to sexual predators. And you know what we say about the internet as well, right? The same thing. So I think the most important thing that the entrepreneurs need to realize is that the only way that you can make any intervention effective in education is by working from inside. You cannot take the system head on. It will not work. So whether it is content, whether it is services, whether it is technology, unless you approach this from the education perspective, from the perspective of where the system today is, any intervention is bound to fail.
Okay. So Deepak, you've been very happily involved with one of the biggest recent successes, which is Baiju, which is a real consumer success story, and there are very few of those. So from learnings from that Baiju, and what would be advice to entrepreneurs who want to start consumer edtech businesses?
Okay. B2C, regardless of where you go in the world, is always one which is fraught with maximum risk. Now, if you take a Yahoo or a Facebook or an Amazon, there is a tremendous amount of effort and staying power you require before that inflection point where you go viral. So that is not a trivial problem. Picture this, when you're selling to an enterprise, you're selling to a bunch of 3 or 4 people, and if they take a process, it's a process that you can follow through, and at the end of 3, 6, 9 months, you get an answer. You get a contract and things move. But when it comes to the consumer, you have to capture his interest in this age where his attention span is somewhere between 15 seconds and probably 45 seconds. And once you hook the guy, you got to bring it in. So you have all these stories about click and bait stories and so many other techniques that people keep throwing at you to try and get you to consume content, and therefore from the content move into buying something. Now, when we started out investing in Baiju's, it was a slightly, I'd say about 3-4 years ago, it was a slightly easier understanding of his universe. He was doing SAT classes and UPSC classes over VSAT and over physical, lecture halls. He used to travel like crazy. He had a team and they used to work together. While we were doing one of our group things between Arun, Mohan Ranjan, I, a couple of other guys, and his own team. And we don't want to take too much credit for it because Baiju is quite an excellent person himself. We kind of looked at what is the total addressable market and is it really SAT and UPSC that's going to give him growth. And we were looking at 11th, 12th preparation for IIT JEE. That was where the next wave of growth was being looked at. So when we started looking at what is the number of students who are there in schools and who's there in each class and how does it gate from a classic gating would be, first, second, third, fourth through about 6th. Then you start getting serious 8th to 10th, and then there's another gate, and then it's 11th, 12th, and then you get to college. The addressable market and the wallet size grew exponentially. So therein, Baiju was also trying tablets at the same time, but he was recording content primarily for distribution through VSAT. At that time, we said, can we do this through a tablet? Can we do it through a more acceptable mass medium? At that time, we also happened incidentally to associate with Samsung and Apple, who were willing to offer tablets. And for, given the rivalry between them, Samsung had a better deal and they were willing to throw out more inventory and more support and give access through all Samsung stores. So the natural step was, let's go with Samsung for the next 24 months. Nothing in business is permanent except your interests, right? So the path was down that. So you had some degree of exposure there. Once you get into B2C, then the way you expose yourself to your target market changes. Baiju had a very hands-on approach. And that approach also gave him a lot of access through the stores. Now, what was the hands-on approach? He used to conduct these massive mega events in every city where he used to primarily invite students and their parents. Why the parents? The parent cuts the check. Why the student? The student either likes or dislikes the experience. So that became a great way for him to get massive feet-on-street outreach rather than throwing money on SEO, which is the classic model. Fling it, catch them on Facebook, catch them when they're browsing something, dump something on YouTube, dump some content marketing with tons of bait and switch opportunities. That's not really. Many people forget that for a B2C, especially in education, there is a high likelihood of success when you do feet on street marketing because we have these catchment areas. You have schools, you have colleges, you have these places where where, you know, basic learners aggregate, and that's a good place to catch them. Now, of course, you're seeing Baiju on television. So let me give you the flip side. Building a B2B business is relatively, outside of the tech, far cheaper, unless you're building it in US or somewhere, because that costs a lot of upfront money, and after about, say about 9 months, you figure out that the sales guy is not delivering, so you start with a new guy. And so B2C is so much easier. I mean, so much tougher, because your CAC, your customer acquisition cost, it just evaporates in front of your eyes, and either you have a customer or you don't. In Baiju's case, the advantage is the customer acquisition cost matches the stickiness of the customer, because he's trying to get a customer as early as possible in his K8 upwards grades, so that he can use the person to go on taking annual subscriptions for the next 3 to 5 years. So that kind of builds out a balance between an upfront investment in customer acquisition cost and the customer lifetime value, so to speak, the longevity of the customer you hold on to. So if I was to, you know, look at any business as an investor, and he's saying I'm going B2B or B2C, my questions around B2C would be no different from that of any other consumer-facing business, as to how quickly he can ramp up, how much is he going to burn, and when is he eventually going to turn to a stage where it's profitable. So I am not the bravest guy in the room right now. I don't think I do a Flipkart of education. And Baiju, when we even spoke to Sequoia and the other investors early during diligences, we told them, you're not buying a fuel efficient vehicle, you're buying a Hummer. It'll go anywhere, it'll go far, it'll stand up through any battles, but it'll cost a bomb to build and run. So once you're getting in knowing that, and you're willing to make that upfront investment, that's the only likelihood that this business will succeed. And that's why he's also taken down a lot of money, and he's taken down a lot of money very sensibly with people who can also partner with him on growing the business.
Arpit, you know, selling to, as any entrepreneur will tell you, and selling to school and colleges is very hard, right? So from your experiences, about college, what are some of the big things you've learned, and what would advise to entrepreneurs be who's starting out selling to institutions in a B2B mode?
Right. The topic of our discussion is disruptive innovation, and I'd like to recall one of the leading thinkers' words, Clay Christensen's, on disruption, where he says that disruption really happens when there are nifty and simpler solutions which can address a larger segment of the market at a lower cost. And that is true disruption. And we treat this to be our guiding light when we go and approach customers. So to answer your question with regard to how difficult it has been to address larger set of customers and larger segments, I would say that education can definitely be divided into multiple micro segments. And for any budding entrepreneur, and from our own experience, we've seen that it is best to start with a very, very clear, small, defined niche and focus on that, and then really go from there. And this can, these niches can be separated by customer segments and also geographies, because over the last 8 years at Serosoft, we have expanded from India, taken our product to other emerging economies like the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Africa, and we have seen that each market gets a whole new set of challenges in terms of localization, even cultural aspects, and other aspects which you need to take care of when you're scaling your venture. So what we have seen has worked for us is basically having an extremely configurable and flexible tech platform which stands at the bottom, and then we basically use that to configure, get it market ready for the new market segments that we are looking to enter, and then utilize that flexibility to make a quick go-to market, which to my mind is extremely important for a company like us, which is looking to scale and scale big.
Thanks.
Does that address some? And the other part which I could just add as a last point is we are in a B2B market, B2B business, and we have seen that one of the most critical factors, which is probably true for all companies, is to have extremely good customer-facing stuff, which I would like to emphasize further. And, when we started, we used to have the best people on the technology side, but the ones who were doing implementation and facing the customers were probably not as good. But soon we realized that as the product was getting built, we needed to switch it around and have our best people talk to customers so that we can really get that feedback, incorporate into our product offerings, get them the real value that they need, and have them as our brand evangelists for further growth that we need to scale up. So having the best people in front of the customer is another learning which came to us over the years when we interacted with more and more people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Subrata, coming from a tech company, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things. How do you see these new technologies impacting technology, education in the next 2-3 years? I mean, any of them becoming relevant to education, you think, next couple of years?
I think for a second, let's move away from what's happening globally and let's look at what's happening locally, because that's where you would be investing or wanting to have your interventions come in. The biggest problem that we have is to derive the demographic dividend. Let me explain that further by saying that there's about 74% of India's workforce which is likely to enter into employment. And on the other side of on the demand side of things, there is a skills requirement. The supply versus the demand is completely skewed, and I don't think you can just look at gross enrollment ratios or as just one parameter to look at the problem. Irrespective of what the government is doing towards skill building and others, I think the responsibility of technology providers is essentially in our country to bridge that gap, because that's the biggest problem that's facing us. I really haven't used determining the charge of an electron by Millikan's oil drop method or the Fraunhofer diffraction lines in the work that I do. And I think the curriculum designed in prehistoric times, that development needs to change. The way you interact with the students, they need to change. And for a second, just, there's been a lot of talk about Khan Academy, Udacity, EduNext and edX as platforms. And do you realize why people stick on to them? Is it just the content? I mean, let me tell you, this is the customer experience that makes you stick. The same metrics that gets used for determining the success of any e-commerce site or any particular website in the internet era defines your stickiness onto either a Khan Academy portal or the EduNext or whatever have you. And have you seen the customer experience that technology providers in education are providing today? Or say, for example, in any other industry, that needs to change dramatically. Okay. Third, there is the pressure of online education. There is the pressure of brick and mortar instructor-led education, which one has to go through in terms of a formal education. And then on the other side of things, look at what's happening on the technology front. Look at the disruptions that are being made with, social engineering. Almost 2.5 billion people in the world connected on it, reaching to about 50% in the next 10 years. Almost 74% of the, of the students and people in that generation will have smartphones, and that will change the interface that we use to interact with education, with government, with employers. So your consumption is that smartphone or whatever developments happen on that smartphone in the years to come. See, it's not about whether I look at it from inside out. The outside in view of education has long been ignored by the community, and that needs to change. Okay, because, I mean, really, it's about how you make use of these technologies. Let's say, for example, I don't see too many people using gamification in understanding or delivering personalized education, need of personalized skills or education, need of the hour. Tell me one site that delivers that. Tell me one site that assesses my current capabilities and tells me if I need to be in the workforce another 15 years, what are the skills I should be imbibing? Where do I go to learn those skills? Where can I practice those skills? And how can I, skill myself without, affecting my livelihood? I think those are the questions that educational entrepreneurs need to answer, and I think the opportunities lie there. As far as my experience is concerned, I have seen a tremendous amount of traction, largely driven by the regulatory authorities and the need to come up with higher GERs, and that are driving a lot of higher education research institutions into adopting structured processes. But guess what? My experience has been that there is no best practices in this industry. Some professor came somewhere and decided this is going to be the process, and it has stuck. And it is completely transformation, completely different if you go to some other industry. Okay? So one side, it is slow. Second, in spite of having standards and regulations, the implementation of the standards and regulations are poor. And third, on the other hand, please look at the issue of demographic dividend very seriously. And what's happening with the current millennial generation and the generation that's going to come, who's going to hit the workforce. How do you train them without taking 5-6 years away from their livelihood? I think that's where technology plays a big role, and I think we need to look at that. I mean, notwithstanding the successes that we have in the educational technology platform, there have been few. I think that needs to increase. But these are some of the areas where I feel educational technology needs to come in because it's happening elsewhere. We also need to be, careful of the fact that, what works in the US or the UK or in any other country may not work in India. Okay, and we've seen that to our own peril when we started implementing solutions that were meant for a particular country into India. There's a huge amount of investment that is required towards localization. One needs to be aware of that. And so if one is aspiring to go global, I don't think it's going to be that easy.
Okay. Thanks. So Srini asked a question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Your company, of course, has been doing assessments for a very long time, and you're now saying you're using it for learning, right? So for a new guy who's starting out an assessments company, right, I mean, who won't have the benefit of all this data that you have, do you think he has a play? Do you think there is any opportunity for him?
I would say absolutely. There is a lot of opportunity, and I'll take on from what Subrata talked about, the outside-in approach. And let me draw the analogy to the medicine world, okay? If you go back 70 years, medicine was nothing but tackling health at the level of a city or a state or a country. If the plague set in, they had to conquer the plague. That's what it was. It was a mass solution issue. And then if you have seen how research and development in the field of medicine has taken, along with technology support, has taken the phenomenon of growth in that industry, it is now an extremely customized solution. If I have to treat myself for, let's say, diabetes control, or somebody else has to treat for the same treatment, it's extremely different. It's extremely customized. That's the kind of movement that has happened. If you take education today, it is a mass subject. A class has a minimum, a teacher has to teach a minimum of 60 students or 45 students. That's what it is, right? That's the reality of the world. But learning happens inside the head. Learning does not happen in a group. So how do you address that? You address that by assessing where each child is in terms of the level of learning that has happened within that child. So I would say the answer to your question is absolutely. There is a humongous opportunity. There are so many children that do not have the privilege of access to technology. It is really good that the industry is now waking up and looking at this as a problem to be solved. Plague was something that was so severe and in terms of affected human beings in terms of livelihood, and not livelihood, in terms of whether they are living or dead, that it had to be tackled. Similarly, we are now in a stage where, the situation is where if we do not address education at a fundamental level, there is risk of millions of youngsters being unemployed. I spent, and why am I in education today? I spent about 25 years of my life in the technology industry, the IT industry. And 3 of the companies that I worked for were startups that I grew from ground up. And I would hire engineers, and there were thousands of engineers, and they would come in and would need at least 6 months to get productive on the job. Oftentimes more than 6 months to get productive on the job. That's not something that the industry can afford for too long. And there are too many of them out there who do not get productive on the job because they are just not fit for the job. Now, how do we do that? How do we tackle this problem? This happens because children are not learning fundamental aspects that they should have learned when they should have learned. And when they don't do that, those problems become obstacles in real life. You're not able to do work in an office today because you have not learned fundamental concepts 6 years ago or 8 years ago or 10 years ago. And the first step to making sense of that is assessment. That is the first step to that. So yes, there is a huge opportunity.
Thank you very much. We have to close. You can take, I think the panelists will be here for a while. You can take them offline. So thank you all. Thank you, panelists. And thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you very much.